Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Torah with your host, Rabbi Anibal here at the Asper Jewish Community Campus in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Interesting, today I don't have anybody in person, but I have you online. So welcome, Glenn. Welcome, David. I know there is somebody else here. I don't know if you're there. Please say hi before we start studying. I know it's summer is here, so things are going to start getting interesting. Whoa, hail on Plano. Yeah, we had hail in Winnipeg as well, like crazy hail. Like, I wish I could show you the video that my wife took. I was teaching here at the campus, so I missed all the fun. We could hear it. We could hear it here. It's a huge building, but the noise of the hail hitting the roof was so intense that we heard it. But then when I went home, I saw all the videos, and the hail was still there. Usually it melts right away. Not this one. Not this one. So welcome, everyone. Welcome. It's Parshat Behar, very interesting Parsha because it's talking about the sabbatical and jubilee years. That used to be a big deal back in biblical times. Not so much in these days. Although sabbaticals still exist. Who's that? Oh, Glenn, thank you. Or you're welcome, I should say. You're welcome for your comment. So yeah, sabbatical and jubilee. Have you ever heard about that? The sabbatical year, jubilee year. And long story short, sabbatical was a cycle of 7 years. Jubilee was a cycle of 7 sabbatical years. So 50 years. And it was a time when people couldn't work the land, which was, back in the day, I can imagine it was a huge blow to the economy, right? Can you imagine if you own a business, and I tell you that you can, every 6th year, the 7th, you can't work. You have to leave your store the way it is, and people, unlocked. People can come and take whatever they want, right, for a whole year. Kind of weird. But that's exactly what the Torah is asking the farmers to do. And of course, you can try to understand this from a rational point of view, because it is well known and documented that if you work the land non-stop, eventually the land starts losing nutrients. And then you will keep planting, and you won't understand why you are not getting anything out of the land. When it is because there are no nutrients. So how do you replenish nutrients in the land? Well, very easy. Just don't touch it, don't do anything. Let everything that grew for that cycle kind of rot or fall back into the ground, and then the ground will reabsorb all these nutrients. So that was one of the ways. So perhaps the sabbatical year intended to do that. Eventually humanity found a better way, which is to divide the land into different sections. So what you do is every year you don't work one section. So then you never stop, because there is always one section at a time replenishing all the nutrients. So that is it seems that it's a better way of doing it. That's the way it's done in these days. So although in these days we have also artificial ways to replenish the land with nutrients, new ways. So yeah, that's what this week Torah portion is talking about. And the other thing that you have to be aware is that I'm talking week after week after week about the counting of the Omer, right? Between Pesach and Shavuot. And there is one day of the counting of the Omer that is special. that is Lag BaOmer, which is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, and it's going to be, God willing, Saturday night. Okay? Saturday night we are going to count 33, so Lag BaOmer is all Sunday. The whole Sunday is Lag BaOmer. Welcome, Holly. Welcome to the class. So hopefully, if we have time today, we're going to study a little bit about what is Lag BaOmer, the implications of Lag BaOmer, and when Lag BaOmer became so important for the Jewish people. Okay. But for now, welcome everyone again. Let's dive into this week's parsha. Now, let me bring the class here. One of the things that you have to understand when we study this Parshat Behar, is that most of the time it comes together with the next Parsha, which is called Bechukotai. Okay? So usually Behar and Bechukotai come together. Each one of them is a shorter Parsha, so when we have to put them together, it's not that long. Okay? So, but years like this one, that is a leap year in the Jewish calendar, we have extra Shabbatot, we have to split the two, Behar and Bechukotai. So it's always a good news for the Torah readers, because each one of the Torah portions is shorter. Okay? So let's study a little bit about Behar. As I mentioned before, it's talking about the sabbatical and jubilee years. But before the Torah goes into all the details from sabbatical and jubilee, the Torah in this week's parsha opens with the following lines. So pay attention to this. It says, "The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord." And you know, right out of the bat, welcome Randy, right out of the bat, we have a problem here. Because it implies that as soon as the people of Israel enter to the land, the first year should be a sabbatical, right? That's what it seems to imply. That's why you will see, starting on verse number 3, the Torah will go into the specifics, and will say, well, it's not like that. When you enter into the land, you're going to have to still work the land for 6 years first, and then on the 7th is a sabbatical. Okay? But it always puzzled to the rabbis. Why will the Torah opens with these verses that seems to complicate things? Why would it say that as soon as you enter to the land, you have to observe a Sabbath of the Lord, right, a sabbatical year, and immediately after said, well, it's not immediately after you enter to the land, but it's after 7 years. Okay? So that's the first thing that we are going to try to understand, why the Torah speaks on this way. The other thing that is interesting is that it's not with every mitzvah, with every commandment, that the Torah will open up with the words that this is what God told Moses on Mount Sinai, even though we know that many of the commandments were given to the Jewish people on Mount Sinai. Okay? And many others were given after, or maybe not. We'll see in a minute. There are different opinions about how God communicated with Moses and how God let Moses know God's will, what to do, what to say, all the commandments. When did it happen? Everything was communicated on Sinai, some things on Sinai, some things after, maybe some things before. With, for example, you have the clear example that before the people of Israel left Egypt, right, they have the obligation to sacrifice the Pesach offering, the Paschal lamb. Well, that happened before Mount Sinai and became a law. The same thing with the law of having a calendar and the law that it says that the month of Nisan is going to be the first month of the year. That happened way before Sinai, even before they left the land of Egypt. So there were many instances where God communicated God's will to Moses on all the mitzvot. But in this case, the Torah is very specific, which again it's not always like this, by saying that this mitzvah was specifically communicated to Moses during Moses' ascension to Mount Sinai. Okay, so now that we understand the context of these couple of verses, let's see what the rabbis think about the way this was presented to us. Okay, and again, if you have any questions, please use the chat to let me know. Gotta go to the next one. So, Rashi is puzzled about the thing, the way it's presented. Listen what he says. What has the sabbatical year to do with Mount Sinai? So, in other words, what Rashi is asking, why was this commandment singled out, right, as being given at Mount Sinai? We know that there were many. So, Rashi asks, were not all commandments given on Sinai? But the verse wishes to tell us, just as with the sabbatical year, both its general principle and its minute details were ordained on Mount Sinai, so too, what with all the commandments. Okay? Their general principles, as well as their details, were ordained on Mount Sinai. So Rashi is saying something very interesting here. It says that even if something was communicated to Moses before, well, when Moses was on Sinai, everything was either repeated to him, okay, from the beginning, either repeated to him, or was something new. But according to Rashi, it was not just the general principle, but also all the details on how to observe those commandments, all the exceptions, all the things that could happen, right, that things may need to change. So all those details were communicated to Moses as well. So in Judaism, we have a name for all that extra information that is not written in the Torah, but we believe that God gave to Moses also as instructions. We call it Torah Shebe'al Peh. Torah Shebe'al Peh, translated as oral law. So, in other words, in Judaism we have, and I want to be very careful the way I say it, we have two Torahs, okay? We have Torah Shebichtav, which means the written Torah, which is the Torah we read in synagogue, the scroll, right? And we have the Torah Shebe'al Peh, the oral law, which eventually became what we know today as the Talmud. Okay, so in this day and age, we still have the two Torahs, written Torah, oral Torah. The written Torah is that Torah that we read at synagogue, and the oral Torah is not oral anymore. It was written, and it's called the Talmud. Okay, so in other words, and I don't want to go into detail, what Rashi is saying here, that Moses learned on Sinai the written Torah and the Talmud. Okay, for us to try to understand what else, what God communicated to Moses, what to do. Now the interesting thing is that the Talmud is presenting all this oral information, but because it was written so many centuries after Revelation, there was no longer one single version. We have a situation of a bunch of rabbis that they go together. They say, okay, guys, let's write down everything that we learn, right? So, okay, so what did you learn about, let's say, slaughtering an animal for consumption, right? How to kill an animal to eat. Okay, I learned this, and somebody else will say, whoa, where did you learn that? I learned this other thing. So what happened is, every time that there was this kind of question, and everybody was presenting their own opinions, there was immediately a debate. The debate was carefully recorded, and in many cases it was voted upon, and then the law was decided following the majority. Okay, Rocky Pollack, welcome to the class. You say, just because they were communicated to Moses doesn't mean that Moses was able to communicate instantly to the nation. Rashi wasn't around to help. Yeah, well, yes, Rashi came many years after Moses. Yes, but what again? I'm repeating the way traditional Judaism understands this. So we believe that all this information that it was passed to Moses, right, on Sinai, Moses learned it all. I don't know if God had exams to be sure that Moses remembered everything that we should be remembered. We don't know that. But eventually, Moses had to teach all that information to the previous generations, to the future generations. So that was done by repeating everything to Joshua, probably the priests, and the elders of that generation. So Moses had an audience that was learning from him all the Torah in this case, during the next 40 years until they entered the promised land, and then Moses died, right? Before they entered. So they had 40 years to learn the entire Torah, and then sometimes we wonder, what was Moses doing for those 40 years? Because according to the rabbis, for those 40 years, there was no communication. Nothing new was communicated to the Jewish people through Moses in those 40 years in the desert. Nothing. It was kind of a disconnection. So what was Moses doing for those 40 years? Watching Netflix? No. We believe that Moses was teaching Torah to Joshua, because he knew that Joshua was going to be the next in command, and to the elders of that generation, so they at the same time could teach all this Torah to future generations. And you have right there, out of the bat, different people learning the same Torah. But because you have different people, we know how it works, that not everybody remembers things the same way, especially in those days. No books, right? Very little thing will be written. And we also believe that the oral law supposed to be oral, so they had a ban. They had a ban on actually writing down all this information, and this came out to play when it was time to write the Talmud. Many rabbis decided that it was not kosher to do it. It was not kosher to write the Talmud, because if the Torah was explained orally from Moses to God, the idea was to keep it oral. So what I would write it down, again, the rabbis voted, and they decided to write it down because otherwise it was going to be lost for good. Okay? So this is what Rashi is saying. Moses learned both written and oral law on Sinai, every single detail. Now, of course, the Talmud, we have different opinions on this, right? Rabbi Ishmael says the general principles of the Torah were given at Sinai, and the details when God spoke to Moses in the tent of meeting. Okay, so why would he say something like this? Well, I guess he was trying to be logical, Rabbi Ishmael. Think about it. Think about it. Moses was up in the cloud for 40 days, 40 nights. Is that enough time to teach a human being the whole written and oral law? Rabbi Ishmael says no. No. So all what happened when Moses went up the mountain is Moses learned all the written Torah and the general principles of the Talmud. In other words, in these days we call it the Mishnah. Talmud is a combination of two different things, Mishnah and Gemara. Mishnah are short statements of law, okay? And Gemara is a discussion of such laws. So Rabbi Ishmael would think that that's all that Moses learned. But Rabbi Akiva says the general principles and the details were given at Sinai. Okay? Everything. How did that happen? We don't know. Maybe time was different there and up to the mountains. I don't know. They said the general principles and all the details were given at Sinai. They were then repeated in the tent of meeting and enjoy a third time in the plains of Moab. It means in Moses' narrative in the book of Deuteronomy. So basically, that God repeated everything after Moses died. Okay? That is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. That is clearly different from Rabbi Ishmael. So, do you guys remember what the tent of the meeting was? Let me know in the chat what the tent of the meeting was. I just realized we should get sponsorship from Pepsi here. You remember what it was? Tent of the meeting? I'll give you a minute. Okay, so the tent of the meeting was a place inside the tabernacle, the sanctuary. And it was a place where Moses would be called up by God whenever God wanted to communicate with Moses. It was like a phone booth, and I'm not joking here. It's the whole idea. It was like a phone booth where God and Moses could have these private conversations. Nobody else will hear such conversations. So after Moses will come out of the tent of the meeting, he will communicate to the entire Jewish nation whatever he said that God told him or communicated him. I will guess it took a lot of faith from the people to believe that all that material, all that information that it's been passed down to them came from God. Right? Moses will come out and say, this is what God said. Did anybody else hear that? No. But they believed. They believed in Moses. Let's continue. Now, let's go back to this concept that I mentioned before, of the first verses, right? It said, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord, right? We're talking about the sabbatical year. Now, there is a beautiful text from the Lubavitcher Rebbe that I want to read to you, because now the rabbis have some explaining to do in why the Torah will contradict itself. It will open the section by saying that the sabbatical year will have to be observed as soon as they enter to the land, but later on will say, no. First you work for 6 years, and then on the seventh is the sabbatical. So why the contradiction? Well, listen to this. Taken on its own, this verse seems to imply that a Sabbath unto God is to be observed immediately upon entering the land. But in practice, when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, they first worked the land for 6 years, and only then observed the seventh year as the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, as indeed the Torah clearly instructs in the following verses. So the Torah is telling us that a Shemitah is to both precede and follow our 6 years of labor, to follow it on the calendar, but to also precede it, if not in actuality, then conceptually. Okay, so let me stop here before I go to the next slide. What the Rebbe is saying is that the Torah opens up with that commandment because there are two different ways of experiencing this sabbatical year. One is the practical one, which means it means you stop working, right? after 6 years, 7th, you don't work. That's the practical way of doing it. But the other one is to have in mind before you start working the land, you have the concept of a sabbatical year in mind before you start the work. Welcome, Jerome.
Hello. Doctor's appointment. Sorry.
It's 12:30. You have the watch on Newfoundland time or something that is half hour late.
Doctor's appointment.
Doctor's appointment. Okay. Okay. I have a better doctor for you. It's called Maimonides.
Okay. I think I've heard of it.
Yeah. Okay. The Rabbi is talking about the concept of sabbatical. Let's continue. Listen to this. So, therein lies an important lesson in how we are to approach the mundane involvements of life. We are talking about sabbatical year. True, we begin with the material, because that's what happened. They entered to the land of Israel, they went straight to work the land. So we begin with the material, for in a world governed by cause and effect, the means inevitably precede the end, right? So in order to get something, first you have to do something, right? You will never get something if you don't do something. It's the way the world works. But what is first in actuality need not to be first in mind. Okay, so what the first thing you do, right? It doesn't have to be your first thought, because yes, first you have to do in order to achieve. But before you do, you have to
Initiate. Think about it.
you have to think. You have to envision it,
Yeah.
right? So what the Rabbi is saying here is it's not true. It's not true that first thing we do is work and then we achieve. That's not true. First you envision, then you work, then you achieve.
Set your goal first.
It's a 3 steps, right? You set your goals first. Exactly. You set your goals first. Love that. So, but what is first in actuality not to be the first in mind. In mind and consciousness, the end must precede the means. For without a clear vision of their purpose to guide them, the means may begin to see themselves as the end. Whew, this is deep. The spiritual harvest of a Shabbat or Shemitah can be achieved only after a work week of dealing with the material world and developing its resources. But it must be preceded and predicated upon a Shabbat unto God that occupies the fore of our consciousness and pervades our every deed. So, which is interesting. That's the concept of Shabbat. Let's go back to the beginning of the world, okay? Because there you can see it clearly. You can see it clearly how after God created the world, it said God rested. Shabbat by Nafash. So God rested, so we rest on Shabbat. So a superficial reading of the Torah may think that all what happened is God did, created, and then rested. But that's not true.
You had to have a goal in the beginning in order to know when to rest.
How do we know that God had a goal? How do we know that God had a vision?
Because you rested. You had accomplished it.
Well, if you don't have a vision, and you do, eventually you're going to rest. But how do you know that God had a vision? Because after every day, God said, and it was good. How do you know if something is good or bad?
You had milestones.
You need to check it against your goals.
Right. You set up milestones. How much I want to accomplish.
And then he said, did I accomplish that? Yes. Okay, it was good. And then at the end, you know, when you create the last, you will see the last day, and then it said it was very good. It means that all the mini goals and the general goals were achieved. And then that's what's a tov meod. Okay, so that's we have a hint as to God had a plan, a vision first, and then when you have a vision, then you can rest, properly rest, properly rest. Otherwise, you're probably, if you don't have a vision, instead of resting, you will have to be covering patches, things that went wrong.
Right.
So this is the same, because as we are going to see, having a sabbatical year, it wasn't easy. You have to plan in advance for that. You work for 6 years. On the 7th, you have nothing, nisht.
So you have to plan to have everything in the 6 years and carry it over.
Did you save for 6 years? A little bit,
Yeah.
right? Because now we already know that it's possible. Joseph did it in Egypt, right?
Yeah.
He was able to store grain. So it said, this is not that I'm not telling you that after 6 years you will have to rest on the 7th. You know it right now. So you need to have a clear vision of how that is going to work. Otherwise, you're going to be at the end of the 6-year cycle. I said, when I'm going to eat next year? Actually, you're going to be struggling for 2 years because on the 7th year,
Yeah, that's right.
you can't harvest, you can't plant.
Yes, you have to wait
So
for
the
fruit.
first year of the cycle is also a weak year.
Yeah.
You got to have some natural things growing, but it's not going to be the same as the year after that. So they have to plan ahead, and that's why the Torah says at the very beginning, when you enter into the land, remember that you're going to have a sabbatical. And then it goes into the details. You work for 6 years and blah, blah, blah. But before you enter, you need to have this in mind. It's a beautiful thing for everything that we are trying to achieve in life. Have a goal, have a plan before you go. Okay? Try to think ahead as much as you can. Of course, there are things that are not under your control. Back in those days, it was the same thing. Do you think they were able to predict that maybe they will have, a 3 years drought before the sabbatical? And then what?
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble. But most of the time, you will be able to plant.
Yeah.
Let's continue. Now, more about this parsha, because I like the way it's presented. It says, when you sell property to your neighbor, okay, or buy any from your neighbor, you shall not wrong one another. Don't cheat him. And then the next verse says, do not wrong one another again, but fear your God, for I, the Lord, am your God. Why is he talking about buying and selling property? Because you have to remember that during the Jubilee that is presented in this parsha,
It's not.
it's all gold back. So part of not wronging one another when you buy and sell property is to calculate how many years are left to the
Yeah.
Jubilee.
Value.
Yeah, so I said, don't be a jerk. Maybe the other person is not aware of that or all the details. So this is what it is. But the rabbis still are a little puzzled on the repetition of the phrase, do not wrong one another. It appears in 2 verses back to back.
That's right.
The previous one ends with Al tonu ish et achiv, and then in the very beginning of the next one, Velo tonu ish et amito. So the same thing at the end of one verse and at the beginning of the next.
The difference between receive and
Amito, it's the same. People, it's the people of your people versus your brother, but it's talking both about your inner group. Yeah. So we have some explaining to do here. Why the repetition? And the rabbi said, Rashi says, because again, Rashi is always, when you study Rashi, you have to always try to understand what's bothering Rashi. Rashi would never write something if it's obvious, but he will never tell you. what is that he didn't find obvious. So it's a whole skill to try to understand what's Rashi's point. In this case, what is bothering him is the repetition, right? So Rashi just starts by saying, the first verse referred to financial fraud. The second verse forbids verbal fraud, speaking hurtful words or giving bad advice. That is why the second verse adds, but you shall fear your God. Lest a person say, who will know that my intention was to do him evil? And it's also because if Jerome, if I'm trying to sell you a property, right? And I cheat on the transaction. If I get caught, what happened? It will most likely be some kind of judicial consequence, right? But if I tell you, if I give you bad advice, and you say, oh, Jerome, you should buy that property, right? And then I ask you to do that because the owner of the property is my friend, and I know that the property is a piece of junk. It looks great, but it's not. And then you buy it, and then you realize that it's a money pit. What's the consequence for me? For giving you the bad advice?
Very little.
Nothing. Nothing. You will come to me. I said, hey, you told me. I didn't say anything. Go try to prove it.
Or you could say, I thought it was a good advice.
No, you can't prove it. There are no legal consequences.
Right.
So that's why in the first case, do not wrong one another, otherwise you go to jail. On the second case, it says, do not wrong one another, God is watching. Why doesn't it say the first case, God is watching? Because there are legal consequences. In the second case is when there are no legal consequences, that God is watching. And that's why you also, when Rashi writes this, that's what was in his head, right? In the first case, it's because there are legal consequences. Second case, because there are no legal consequences. But Rashi that doesn't let us know that that was the motivation to write what he wrote.
Right.
That's why when you read Rashi, you always have to ask, what is bothering him here? Okay? And then Rashi realized right away that what are the kind of things that is considered wronging one another, that they have no legal consequences? Usually speaking hurtful words or giving bad advice.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's why I said, don't fool yourself. God is watching. God will be the vindicator in that situation. Not a human judge. God. It's going to be done on God's terms, on God's timeline.
Right.
It's going to come from God. Okay? Now, so the Rambam explains more about this second category. Okay? About these ways to wrong one another, that they are not really illegal, but they are bad. And Rambam, the Maimonides, writes as follows. And similarly, lies, tricks, subterfuges, cheatings are circumventions, right? Circumventions are forbidden. Loopholes. It's all forbidden. They say it is forbidden to deceive anyone, and even more so, now Rambam is adding another layer, when it can lead to the desecration of God's name. Okay? Because basically, maybe what you do when you say is not necessarily illegal, but now the fact that it become known that you are such person, and you're a Jew. your attitude, your behavior is spilling on all of us. Okay? So it said, even more so when you're maybe like a well-known person and you're going around finding loopholes, giving bad advice, taking advantages.
Yeah.
That, according to the Rambam, leads to the desecration of God's name. For that is a great sin and imbues in a person bad traits. And all these wicked actions, God explained that He will be disgusted with them and with those who perform them. Because again, no legal consequences on earth. But God said, I will be disgusted. And about that, God says in Deuteronomy, for anyone who does this is an abomination to God. So, holy, what you say here, it said, even back then, special caveats, how do you say caveats? Caveats were necessary for realtors. Even in this day, what do you mean back then? What do you mean back then? Very insightful, still relevant. Yeah, in these days too. That they, some people, they know how to hide certain information, right? And then you come complaining, and they say, you never asked. Had you asked me, and I will tell you that, the roof is leaking. But you never ask. Oh, you didn't consider that it would be a good idea before the transaction is over to disclose that? I'm not legally obligated to do that.
Now they've put in caveats that you have to disclose it.
Well, yeah, but not everything. There are certain things that you may know that there is a problem, right? And then when it's done, it's done. Yeah. Now, so all this kind of verbal fraud, and by extension, all kind of bad but not necessarily illegal form of cheating, is called in Hebrew geneivat da'at. What is a ganev? A thief. Da'at? Knowledge. So geneivat da'at is like I make you believe something that is not real. Okay?
Yeah.
So it could be, for example, cheating at school. It looks like I know, but I don't know. I cheated on the exam. Right? But it's interesting because that is called also theft.
Right.
So in this case, let me explain why cheating at school is bad. Now, Rabbi Menashe Klein was a Hasidic Rebbe. He says, cheating is a violation of geneivat da'at, both against the professor, but also against future employers who take grades to be a measurement of competence. Right?
You got a degree from this university, you should be really knowledgeable. Yeah.
No, but it's not about that. It's about, let's say that I study like crazy, right, for the exam. You didn't. You cheated. You had a hidden computer, right? Or you have an earpiece. Somebody was telling you all the answer from the outside. Okay? So you got a 100 on the test. I got a 95. We both applied to a job. You got it because you got 100. I didn't get it because I only got a 95. So you stole my job. Sometimes we don't think about cheating in those days, in those ways. What about, for example, this, what was the name? The famous cyclist, Armstrong.
Oh yeah, this is doping.
Doping, right? He won all these tournaments, right? Cheater, they call it.
Yeah.
Cheater? You're a thief. You're not a cheater.
Stole medals.
No, what do you mean medals? Because of the medals, he got sponsorship.
Right.
He got millions of dollars that it would pay to him to represent the brand that technically should be gone to somebody else.
Right.
But he stole it from them and he got all that money. So, dude, you're not a cheater. You're a thief. Lance Armstrong. Lance Armstrong. So you are a you're a thief. You're not a cheater. So in Judaism, cheating is a form of stealing. That's something that we have to be aware. And as I promised you guys, Sunday is, I'm gonna go quickly here. Hold on. Lag BaOmer on Sunday. Right? This Sunday. So Saturday night, God willing, we are going to count 33. And then Sunday is Lag BaOmer. What is Lag BaOmer? Let's review it together, okay? Let's remember what it is. Lag BaOmer, the 33rd day of the Omer count, will be this year, Sunday, May 26, 2024. Okay, just remember that. Chances are that in your city, there are celebrations. I know we have in Winnipeg, a few synagogues organize that. Hopefully one day Shari Zedek will have a place to do it. Soon. B'meheira v'yameinu. So, Lag BaOmer is a festive day on the Jewish calendar. It is celebrated with day trips, in which children traditionally play with bows and arrows, bonfires, parades, and other joyous events. Many visit the grave of the great sage and mystic Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, that is located in Israel, in a place called Meron.
Right.
It's northern Israel, Meron.
That narrow opening to get there.
Sorry?
With that narrow opening to get there where they have the problems.
There's always somebody dying there, right? There was one year during COVID that a huge group of ultra-Orthodox, they disobeyed the protocols and they went in mass to thing and the thing collapsed.
Yeah.
They were on like bleachers and they collapsed. It was a disaster. It was a disaster. So they were afraid of dying from COVID. They ended up dying because of the weight of other people falling on top of them. So why do they go there for Lag BaOmer? Well, because it's the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay? Now, Lag BaOmer is always on the 18th day of the month of Iyar. So that was the Yortzeit. The Yortzeit of Bar Yochai is the 18th day of the month of Iyar. It will be interesting to check Shari Zedek list, right, the Yortzeit list, to see who else has a Yortzeit and Lag BaOmer, supposed to be a holiday. So the word Lag is made of the Hebrew letters Lamed and Gimel, which together have the numerical value of 33. So BaOmer means of the Omer. Again, the Omer is the counting period that begins on the second day of Passover, culminates with the holiday of Shavuot, following day 49. Okay? Hence, Lag BaOmer is the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer, which coincides with the 18th of Iyar. Okay? Good. So what are we celebrating? Because I said, we are going there for the Yortzeit of Bar Yochai. Yortzeit? Rabbi, you just told me it's a celebration. Right? Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who lived in the 2nd century of the Common Era, was the first to publicly teach the mystical dimension of the Torah known as Kabbalah, and is the author of the classic text of Kabbalah, the Zohar. On the day of his passing, Rabbi Shimon instructed his disciples to mark the day as a day of my joy. Okay? So basically he told the disciples, when I die, don't cry celebrate me. Celebrate my passing because I'm going to heaven, right?
Isn't there a controversy that perhaps the Kabbalah, that Zohar was written
In Spain.
In Spain, yeah.
Yeah, but Moses de Leon. Yeah, there is a controversy. Some people say that the Zohar was written in Spain by Moses de Leon. You're absolutely right. So, the final day of a righteous person's earthly life marks the point at which all their deeds, teaching, and works achieve their culminating perfection and the zenith of their impact upon our lives. So each Lag BaOmer, we celebrate Rabbi Shimon's life and the revelation of the esoteric soul of Torah. So it's a day that not only we celebrate the achievement of Rabbi Shimon, and we are thankful for everything that he shared with humanity, because there were many Kabbalists that they were experts, but they kept it to themselves. Maybe they have one student, but he opened it up to a generation. Okay? Regardless of he wrote the Zohar or not, he taught that during his life. He taught mysticism. What he taught, we don't know. We weren't there. No. We may have one or two congregants that they were there, but so, Lag BaOmer also commemorates another joyous event. The Talmud relates that in the weeks between the Jewish holidays of Passover and Shavuot, a plague raged among the disciples of the great sage Rabbi Akiva, who was a teacher. He was a teacher of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, by the way. So Bar Yochai was Rabbi Akiva's student. So we have another connection there. So why was the plague among the disciples of Rabbi Akiva? The Talmud says, because they did not act respectfully towards each other. These weeks are therefore observed as a period of mourning with various joyous activities prescribed by law and custom. Some people don't do certain things during the counting of the Omer. Like they don't go to, they don't get married, they don't cut their hair, they don't shave, other things. On Lag BaOmer, the death ceased. This is all rabbinic tradition.
Yeah.
We don't really know, but that's what I say. On Lag BaOmer, the plague stopped. Okay. So thus Lag BaOmer also carries the theme of loving and respecting one another. Because if that's why they died, right? Yeah. And then on Lag BaOmer they stopped dying is maybe because that's the day where they got it. They got the message that how we have to live with each other, right? So that's why Lag BaOmer is also important. Is the day that we understand that, the day that we understand that we have to be respectful to each other, is a day of celebration. That's why also another reason why Lag BaOmer is a day of celebration. And in rabbinic tradition, they have this semi-mourning period up to Lag BaOmer, and then that's it. And then that's it. So that's the way it is. So, do we have any questions about Lag BaOmer? This is your opportunity to fully understand the day before you have a chance to experience it on Sunday. Okay? Yeah. So, well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Jerome, for coming. Everything okay with the doctor?
Oh yeah, fine.
Did you pay the bill? Oh no, it's Canada. We have people in the United States that they have to pay the doctor after they go visit, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you everyone. If you missed any part of the class, remember how it works. Tonight, 8 p.m. Central, this class is going to be rebroadcasted, so you have a chance to catch it again and to learn more about Parshat Behar. Hi, Roberto Franco, welcome. Behar, and also about a little bit about Lag BaOmer. So thank you everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day, and please find a way to celebrate Lag BaOmer on Sunday. Beautiful day to do activities, especially now that the weather is going to be nice by Sunday. Not Sunday? No?
I think it's raining.
Okay. We'll do our best. Thank you, everyone. Bye.